I, 32, F. Thought the worst sound in the world was silence. The kind of silence that follows a terrible argument, thick and heavy with things unsaid. I was wrong. The worst sound is a voice you trust, speaking words that shatter your world, when that person thinks you can no longer hear them. It started so simply. My husband, Mark, was on the phone in the other room. I was in the kitchen, making tea, the steam warming my face. He was talking to my stepbrother, Leo. Their calls were frequent, something I had always encouraged. I believed in family, in keeping those bonds strong, even the ones formed by remarriage. His voice was a low murmur, but then it rose slightly as he prepared to end the call.
Allricht, Mann.
I'll see you tomorrow at the cafe, he said. A pause. Then, the words that were meant for me a little nightly ritual. Love you, I smiled to myself, stirring my tea. I heard the soft click I assumed was him ending the call. I took a sip of my tea and was about to call out to him when his voice came again, clear as a bell through the still air of our quiet house. He had not hung up. He must have just locked his screen. Is she gone? It was Leo's voice, tinny and distant through the phone's speaker, but unmistakable. My hand froze, the warm mug suddenly feeling cold against my skin. Yeah, she's in the kitchen, Mark replied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She did not suspect a thing. She bought the whole story about the new supplier contract. My heart began to pound, a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. What story? What was I supposed to have suspected? Leo chuckled, a sound I had always found grating but now sounded truly sinister. Good. My mom has been working on her too, telling her how stressed she looks, how much the business is taking out of her. Planting the seed that she should take a step back, my mother. He was talking about my mother. The sweet, concerned conversations we had been having lately suddenly replayed in my mind, recast in a horrifying new light. They were not conversations. They were manipulations. It's working, Mark said, and I could almost hear the smug smile in his voice. She's starting to agree. She thinks a long vacation is what she needs, a vacation I had been planning, a vacation he had encouraged me to take. My breath hitched. I leaned against the counter, trying to keep my knees from buckling. The cafe was my dream, funded by the inheritance my father left me. It was everything. Mark had put in a small fraction of the money, but I had made him an equal partner because I loved him, because I trusted him. Leo, my stepbrother whom my mother always favored, had been hired as an assistant manager just 2 months ago, at Mark's insistence. It was a family business, he had said. We should keep it in the family. So the final paperwork is ready? Leo asked, his voice sharp with greed. Almost, Mark confirmed. The buyer is eager. David is getting everything lined up. He just needs her final signature on the transfer of assets form. I'll get it from her next week, tell her it's a routine tax document or something. She never reads the fine print. My mind went blank with a cold, terrifying shock. Buyer? Transfer of assets? They were selling my cafe. They were selling my dream, my father's legacy, right out from under me. And my own mother was helping them. And the new accounts are all set up? Leo pressed. Yep. The funds will be transferred directly to the holding company. By the time she gets back from her relaxing vacation and figures out what happened, the business will be gone, the money will be ours, and we'll be on our way to setting up the new place. She'll have nothing. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. It was not just business. It was personal. They wanted to leave me with nothing. Perfect, Leo breathed. She deserves it. She always had everything handed to her by her daddy. The bitterness in his tone was a physical blow. I had always tried to be a sister to him, to bridge the gap between us. I had offered him a job, a good one, to help him get on his feet. This was my reward. This was how they saw me. As an obstacle, as a fool to be tricked and discarded. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt the hot sting of tears behind my eyes, but I forced them back. This was not the time for tears. This was the time for listening. I needed to hear every last word. Mark's voice was low and satisfied. Don't worry. This is going to work. She trusts me completely. She trusts her mother. It's the perfect plan. He paused, and I heard a rustling sound. Okay, I should go. I'll see you tomorrow later, Leo said. Then I heard the definitive click of the call ending. Silence descended on the house again, but this time it was different. It was not empty. It was filled with betrayal, with lies, with the wreckage of my life. I stood there in the kitchen for what felt like an eternity, the tea in my mug growing cold. My world had been upended in the space of a 2-minute conversation. My husband, my stepbrother, my mother, the 3 people who were supposed to be my closest family were united in a conspiracy against me. The shock was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But beneath the shock, something else was beginning to stir. A tiny, cold spark of anger. They thought I was a fool. They thought I was weak. They thought they could take everything from me, and I would just let them. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. My vacation was in 3 weeks. That gave me 3 weeks to not just stop them, but to make them pay for every single lie. The plan began to form in my mind, a dark and intricate web. My tears finally fell, not from sadness, but from a new, terrifying resolve. This was not just business anymore. This was war. I took a deep, shuddering breath and forced myself to move. I poured the cold tea down the sink, my hand shaking so badly that the mug rattled against the stainless steel. I rinsed it out, placed it carefully in the dishwasher, and closed the door with a soft click. Every small, normal action felt monumental, a lie I was telling to the universe. I had to act normal. That was the most important thing. Mark could not know that I knew. Not yet. I walked out of the kitchen and into the living room, where he was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I entered, a warm smile spreading across his face. It was the same smile he had given me every day for 5 years.
Now, it looked like a mask.
Hey, honey, he said, his voice casual and light. Everything okay? You were in there for a while. I forced my own smile, a painful stretching of my lips. It felt brittle, like it might crack and reveal the rage simmering just beneath the surface. Just thinking, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, about the trip. I'm really looking forward to it. I think you and Mom are right. I need a break. His eyes lit up with a look of such feigned sincerity it made my stomach turn. Of course you do, he said, patting the cushion next to him. You've been working so hard. You deserve to relax and recharge. Leo and I can handle the cafe for a couple of weeks. No problem at all. I sat down next to him, letting him put his arm around me. His touch felt like a brand, a mark of his betrayal. I had to fight the urge to recoil. I leaned my head on his shoulder, playing the part of the trusting, tired wife. I know you can, I murmured. I'm so lucky to have you both. He squeezed my shoulder. We're the lucky ones, he said. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. He truly believed it. He truly believed I was that naive. I felt a cold calm settle over me. My grief and shock were still there, a churning sea beneath the surface, but on top, there was a layer of ice. This was a game now, and I had just learned the rules. They had been playing for months, but I was a fast learner. I would play their game, and I would win. That night, as I lay in bed next to him, pretending to be asleep, my mind was racing. I went over their conversation again and again, dissecting every word. The buyer, David. The holding company. The final signature. These were the pieces of their plan. These were the things I needed to unravel. The next morning, the charade began in earnest. I woke up and made breakfast, just like any other day. I chatted with Mark about trivial things, the weather, a show we had been watching. All the while, I was observing him, looking for cracks in his performance. There were none. He was a natural liar. It was a chilling realization. The man I had married was a stranger to me. When he left for the cafe, I waited exactly 15 minutes, then I got to work. My first stop was my laptop. I needed to find out about this holding company. Mark had mentioned it was where the funds from the sale would be transferred. I logged into the business bank account, my heart hammering against my ribs. I scrolled through months of transactions, my eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary. And there it was. A series of small, regular payments listed under consulting fees, made out to a company I had never heard of. Lionsgate Enterprises. It sounded so official, so bland. I did a quick search online. Lionsgate Enterprises was registered just 4 months ago. The registered agent and sole director? My stepbrother. My breath caught in my throat. It was real. This was not some horrible nightmare. It was happening. They were siphoning money from my business, my inheritance, and funneling it into a shell company he controlled. The consulting fees were a lie, a slow bleed to fund their scheme. I took screenshots of everything. The transaction records, the company registration details. I saved them to a secure cloud drive, one Mark knew nothing about. This was my first piece of concrete evidence. My next step was to understand the sale. Mark had mentioned a buyer named David. I knew a few Davids, but one came to mind immediately. David Chun, a property developer we had met at a business networking event a few months ago. Mark had been very keen to talk to him, saying he had great contacts. I found his business card in the drawer of our home office desk. I stared at the name, the phone number. I could not call him directly.
Not yet.
It would tip them off. But I had a name. I had a target. I needed to know what documents they had prepared. Mark had said he needed my final signature on a transfer of assets form. He planned to pass it off as a tax document. This meant there was a file somewhere, either on our shared computer or at the cafe. I decided to start with the computer. I spent the next hour searching through files, looking for anything related to a sale, to David Chun, to Lionsgate Enterprises. I found nothing. Mark was careful. He must be keeping the files at the cafe or on a separate device. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was my mother. My stomach twisted into a knot. I took a breath and answered, forcing my voice to sound cheerful. "Hi, Mom. Hello, darling," she chirped. "I was just calling to see how you are. You've been on my mind. You sounded so tired the other day." Here it was. The script Leo had mentioned. She was planting the seeds. "I think I'm a little tired," I admitted, playing my part. "Mark and I were just talking about it last night. I think I really do need that vacation." "Oh, I think that's a wonderful idea," she gushed. "You deserve a proper rest. You've put so much of yourself into that cafe. It's okay to let go a little bit, Let the boys handle it." Mark is so capable, and it's been wonderful to see Leo thriving there. I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. Let the boys handle it, the casual, patronizing dismissal of my role, my investment, my dream. "You're right," I said, my voice tight. "They are doing a great job, of course they are," she said, her tone soothing and condescending. "You just focus on yourself, sweetheart. Rest up. That's the most important thing." I felt a surge of cold fury. She was not just an enabler. She was an active participant. She was lulling me into a state of complacency while they prepared to rob me blind. "Thanks, Mom," I said, my voice like ice. "I will." I ended the call and sat there, staring at the wall. The betrayal from Mark was a knife in the heart. But the betrayal from my own mother was a poison, seeping into every part of me. She had chosen him, her new husband's son, over me. My own daughter. The pain was immense, but it was also clarifying. There were no lines they would not cross, which meant there could be no lines I would not cross to stop them. The next day, I decided to go to the cafe. I needed to find those documents. I told Mark I was coming by to drop off some paperwork and to have lunch. He sounded pleased, completely unsuspecting. "That's great, honey," he said over the phone. "Leo and I will be here. See you in a bit." When I arrived, the cafe was bustling. It was a beautiful space, one I had designed myself, from the custom lighting to the reclaimed wood tables. Seeing it, knowing what they were planning to do, filled me with a fierce, protective anger. This was mine. They would not take it. Mark greeted me with a kiss. Leo gave me a quick, awkward hug. They were so normal, so friendly. It was like watching a play, and only I knew the final act. I made my way to the small office in the back, on the pretense of needing to use the computer. "Just need to print out some travel insurance forms for the trip," I said breezily. Go ahead, Mark said, not even looking up from the counter where he was talking to a supplier. You know the password, I did. But I suspected the files I was looking for would not be so easy to find. I sat down at the desk and started searching. I looked through every folder, every document. Nothing. It was all standard business files, invoices, schedules, payroll. He was either using a different computer or a portable hard drive. I looked around the office. It was small and cluttered. There was a filing cabinet in the corner. I tried the handle. It was locked. Of course it was. My heart sank a little. I would not be able to get into it without a key. I glanced back out the office door. Mark and Leo were busy with the lunch rush. I had a few minutes. I started looking around the desk. In the top drawer, under a pile of pens and paper clips, I found a small, unlabeled USB drive. My fingers closed around it. This could be it. It felt too easy, but Mark could be arrogant. He might think I would never look or that I would not know what I was looking at. I quickly plugged it into the computer. A single folder appeared on the screen. It was titled Project Nightingale. My breath caught. I clicked on it. The folder was full of documents. A draft of a sales agreement. A list of assets to be transferred. A detailed business plan for a new restaurant. And a file named D.C.Coms. I opened it. It was an email chain between Mark and David Chun. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the messages. They were discussing the sale of my cafe.
They talked about me.
Mark referred to me as the emotional partner who was being difficult and needed to be managed. He told David that I had agreed in principle to the sale but was getting cold feet and that he was handling it. He assured him my signature was just a formality. It was all there in black and white. The lies, the manipulation, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it all. They were not just selling the business. They were actively creating a false narrative to discredit me. I quickly copied the entire contents of the USB drive to my secure cloud account. Then I deleted the transfer history from the computer, ejected the drive, and put it back exactly where I had found it. I took a few deep breaths to calm my racing heart. I printed a random travel insurance form for show, then walked out of the office. Mark looked up as I approached. All set, he asked with a smile. All set, I replied, forcing my own smile back. Ready for lunch? We sat at one of the tables, and he and Leo joined me. They talked about the cafe, about their plans for a new menu item. I listened, nodded, and played my part. I was the loving wife, the proud business owner, completely oblivious. But inside, I was a different person. I was a woman with a secret, a woman with evidence. The game had changed. I now had leverage. They thought they were in control. They had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings now. The 3 weeks I had before my vacation stretched out before me, a timeline for their destruction. And I was going to enjoy every single minute of planning it. My next step was to find a lawyer. I could not use the firm that had set up the business. Mark had their contact details, and it was too risky. I needed someone loyal only to me. I thought of Mr. Harris, my father's old lawyer and friend. He was retired now, but I knew he still did some consulting work. More importantly, I trusted him implicitly. He had known me since I was a child and had always looked out for my best interests, just as my father had asked him to. I found his number and called him that afternoon after I left the cafe. I told him I needed to discuss a sensitive business matter. He agreed to meet me the next day at his home office. "Clara, it's good to see you, my dear," he said, ushering me into his study. It was a warm, book-lined room that smelled of old paper and leather. "But you sounded worried on the phone. What's wrong?" I did not waste any time. I laid it all out. The overheard phone call. The holding company in Leo's name. The emails with David Chun. The locked filing cabinet. I showed him the documents I had copied from the USB drive on my tablet. He read through them in silence, his expression growing more and more grim. When he was finished, he took off his glasses and looked at me, his eyes full of concern. This is a significant betrayal, Clara," he said softly. "On multiple fronts. I am so sorry you are going through this." "I'm past being sorry," I said, my voice hard. "Now I want to be smart. They're planning to have me sign a transfer of assets form disguised as a tax document. They think that's the final step. What can I do? Mr. Harris nodded slowly, his mind already at work. The first thing we need to do is see the original partnership agreement. The one we drew up when you and Mark started the cafe. Do you have a copy? I did. I had kept all the important documents from my father's estate in a safe deposit box. I had brought it with me. I handed him the thick folder. He opened it and began to read, his finger tracing the lines of text.
He was silent for a long time.
I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, waiting. The clock on his mantelpiece ticked loudly in the quiet room. Finally, he looked up, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Ah," he said, "your father was a very wise man." And a very protective one. He turned the document around and pointed to a specific clause, deep in the fine print. Section 12, subsection B. I leaned forward to read it. It stated that due to the primary capital investment coming from a personal inheritance, any attempt to sell, transfer, or dilute the primary investor's shares without that investor's explicit, notarized consent, obtained during a formal meeting with legal counsel present for both parties, would be considered a fraudulent act and a breach of contract. In the event of such a breach, all ownership shares held by the secondary partner, Mark, would be immediately forfeited and revert to the primary investor.
Me.
I read it again, the words blurring slightly. I looked up at Mr. Harris. "What does this mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It means," he said, his smile widening, "that the moment Mark had you sign a fraudulent document, or even took concrete steps to prepare that fraud, like creating these sales agreements with David Chun without your knowledge, he breached the contract. It means he has already forfeited his shares. It means, Clara, that you already own 100% of the cafe." The air rushed out of my lungs. It was a trump card, a silver bullet, a provision my father had put in place to protect me years after he was gone. They thought they were being clever, but they had already lost before the final move was even made. "So, what do I do now?" I asked, my mind reeling with the possibilities. "We document everything," Mr. Harris said, his voice firm and professional again. "We gather our evidence. We let them walk further into the trap. You said the vacation is in 3 weeks? Let them think their plan is proceeding perfectly. Let Mark get that signature from you." "But I can't sign it," I said. "Oh, you'll sign it," he replied with a glint in his eye. "You'll sign a document. Just not the one he thinks you're signing. We'll prepare a different one. A confession." The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Mr. Harris would draft a document that, on the surface, looked like a standard legal form. But embedded in the dense legal text would be a full admission of the fraud, the conspiracy to sell the business, the siphoning of funds, and the involvement of Leo and my mother. Mark, in his arrogance and haste, would not read the fine print. He would just be looking for my signature at the bottom. Once he had that signed confession and a witness, my next move would be to call the police. No, that was too messy. It was better to use it as leverage. The public humiliation would be far more satisfying. Over the next week, I lived a double life. By day, I was the excited wife, planning my trip, talking about souvenirs I would buy, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around me. I went to yoga classes. I had lunch with friends. I let Mark see me packing my suitcase. Every action was a carefully crafted piece of misdirection. By night, I was a strategist working with Mr. Harris. We hired a forensic accountant who quietly went through the cafe's books. He quickly confirmed my suspicions about Lionsgate Enterprises and uncovered even more. Mark and Leo had been padding expenses, creating fake invoices, and skimming cash from the daily deposits. The total amount they had stolen was far more than I had initially realized. It was over $50,000. The accountant prepared a detailed report, a damning log of their greed. Each page was another nail in their coffin. Mr. Harris also suggested we look into David Chun, the potential buyer. He hired a private investigator. The investigator's report came back 2 days later, and it was explosive. David Chun was not just a property developer. He was on the verge of bankruptcy. The purchase of my cafe was his last-ditch effort to acquire a profitable asset he could flip or leverage for loans. And worse, he had a history of shady deals. But the most crucial piece of information was that he was not paying with his own money. The funding for the sale was coming from an investor who remained anonymous. The investigator dug deeper. The anonymous investor was my stepfather, my mother's husband, Leo's father. The circle of betrayal was complete. It was a family affair, a coordinated attack from all sides. My stepfather was providing the money for David Chun to buy my business, which my husband and stepbrother were stealing, with my mother's help. They were going to use my own family's money to buy the assets stolen from me. It was a breathtakingly vicious scheme. I felt a profound sense of loneliness, of being utterly surrounded by enemies who wore the faces of family. But the loneliness did not break me. It forged my anger into something harder, sharper.
Steal.
I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed to know what they planned to do with the money, and I needed to hear it from them. I decided to use Mark's arrogance against him. One evening, as we were watching a movie, I rested my head on his shoulder and let out a soft sigh. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his attention still mostly on the screen. "I was just thinking," I said, my voice carefully laced with a hint of melancholy. "About the cafe. It's been my whole life for 2 years. Sometimes I wonder if it's what I really want forever. It's so much work." I felt him tense slightly. I had taken the bait. He turned to look at me, his expression a mask of concern. "What do you mean, honey?" he asked. "Are you not happy with it?" "I love it," I said quickly. "Of course I do. But it's a lot of pressure. Managing everything, the finances. Sometimes I just dream of selling it all, and us moving somewhere quiet, starting something smaller, simpler. Just for us." I watched his face carefully. A flicker of something, greed, excitement, crossed his features before he could hide it. He thought I was leading myself right into his trap. He thought my mother's work had been a resounding success. "You know," he said slowly, as if the idea were just occurring to him. "It's funny you should say that. Leo and I were talking the other day, just hypothetically, about what the cafe might be worth. It's a prime location. We could probably get a very good price for it." He was testing the waters. I pretended to be surprised. "Really? You think so?" "I know so," he said, his confidence growing. "We could sell it, pay off our debts, and have enough left over to start fresh anywhere we want. A new restaurant, something more high-end. Something that's really ours." The slip was tiny, but I caught it. Ours, not our as in him and me. Ours as in him and Leo. That does sound amazing," I said, letting a dreamy quality enter my voice. "A new start. But selling the cafe, it feels like such a big step." "It is," he agreed, putting his arm around me and pulling me closer. "And it's just a thought. Nothing we have to decide now. But it's nice to think about, isn't it? A future with no stress, just a pile of cash and a blank slate." He was painting a picture for me, a beautiful mirage to distract me from the ugly reality. He thought he was lulling me into his plan. In reality, he was confessing. He was telling me everything I needed to know. The conversation confirmed their motive. It was not just about getting the business. It was about starting a new one, a bigger one, without me. They wanted my capital, but not my presence. I was just the inconvenient source of the money. That night, I cried. Not for the man lying next to me, but for the man I thought he was. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, and for the family I had tried so hard to build. And when the tears were gone, all that was left was the cold, hard certainty of what I had to do. The final week before my trip arrived. The tension in the house was a palpable thing, but only I could feel it. Mark was cheerful, attentive, the perfect husband. He helped me finalize my travel plans, bought me a new book to read on the plane. Every gesture was a lie, a twist of the knife. 2 days before my flight, he chose his moment. It was evening. I was in the living room, making a final checklist. He came in holding a thin folder. He looked a little nervous, but excited, like a child with a secret. "Hey, honey," he said, sitting down next to me. "Sorry to bother you with this, but could you sign something for me before you go? It's just some updated tax forms for the cafe." The accountant sent them over. They need to be filed while you're away. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was it. The moment of truth. I looked at him, my face a carefully constructed mask of mild annoyance.
Now?
Mark, I'm trying to get organized for my trip. I know, I'm sorry, he said, his voice wheedling. It'll only take a second. It's just the usual stuff. I've marked the pages where you need to sign. He opened the folder and pushed it towards me. I glanced down. It looked official. Lots of dense paragraphs, legal jargon. At the bottom of the third page, there was a yellow sticky note with an arrow pointing to a signature line. Sign here, it said in his handwriting. I stalled for a moment. What is this for, exactly? I asked, pretending to skim the first page. It's for the quarterly tax filings, he said quickly, a little too quickly. It's just a declaration of assets for the end of the fiscal quarter. Standard procedure. He was a terrible liar when he was nervous. I had just never had a reason to look for it before. I picked up the pen he was holding out to me. My hand was perfectly steady. Okay, I said with a sigh. If it'll get you to leave me alone so I can finish packing, I leaned over the coffee table. But instead of the folder he had given me, I picked up an identical one I had placed there earlier, hidden beneath a stack of travel magazines. It was the document Mr. Harris had prepared. The confession. I opened it. The layout was identical. The signature page was in the same spot. To a casual glance, they were the same document. I signed my name with a flourish on the line he had so helpfully pointed out. Then I slid the folder back to him. There, I said. All done. He took it, his face breaking into a wide, relieved grin. He did not even look at the page. He just closed the folder, his eyes shining with triumph. Thanks, honey, he said, leaning in to kiss me. You're the best. I promise I won't bother you with any more work stuff. You just go and have an amazing time. I will, I said, my voice soft. I watched him as he took the folder and placed it carefully in his briefcase. He thought he had it. He thought he had won. He had no idea that he was holding his own signed and witnessed destruction in his hands. He had just confessed to fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. And I had it in writing. My trip was scheduled to depart in 2 days. But I was not going to the airport. I was going to a war room. The final confrontation needed to be perfect. It needed to be public. It needed to be devastating. I thought about the perfect venue. A quiet meeting was not enough. I wanted them exposed. I wanted them humiliated. Then I remembered. My mother was hosting a small family dinner the night before my flight, a little send-off party for me. It was perfect. My mother, Leo, Mark, my stepfather. All of my enemies gathered in one place, celebrating my departure. They would be toasting my vacation while I would be orchestrating their downfall. It was poetic. The stage was set. The actors were in place. And I was ready for the final act. The night of the dinner party arrived. I spent the afternoon in a state of strange calm. I packed a small overnight bag, a prop for my performance. I laid out the outfit I would wear, a simple, elegant black dress. It felt appropriate, like I was attending a funeral. The funeral of my old life. When Mark came home from the cafe, he was practically buzzing with excitement. He thought he was on the precipice of his new life, his new fortune. He was attentive and affectionate, helping me with my bag, telling me how beautiful I looked. His every word, every touch, was fuel for the fire inside me. We drove to my mother and stepfather's house. Walking in, I felt a chill despite the warm evening air. This house, which had once been a place of comfort, now felt like enemy territory. My mother greeted me with a huge hug, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Darling, I'm so glad you could make it. We're all so excited for your trip, she exclaimed. My stepfather, a man I had always found distant and cold, was surprisingly warm, patting me on the shoulder. You deserve this break, Clara, he said. You've earned it. Leo was there, of course, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He was trying to hide it, but I could see the triumph in his eyes. They all thought they were so clever. They were gathered here to celebrate their victory over the family fool. We sat down for dinner. The conversation was light, full of laughter and plans. They talked about the future, about expansion, about new opportunities. They were careful not to mention the cafe directly, but the air was thick with their shared secret. I played my part, smiling and nodding, asking questions about my trip, pretending to be distracted and excited. I ate my food, each bite tasting like ash. I listened to their lies, their false praise, and I let my anger build, a cold, controlled burn. Finally, dessert was served. My mother brought out a cake. On it, in frosted blue letters, were the words Bon Voyage, Clara. It was the perfect, sickeningly ironic touch. As she was cutting the slices, I decided it was time. I cleared my throat, and the table fell silent. Before we have cake, I began, my voice clear and steady. I just want to say a few words. Mark beamed at me, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Of course, honey. I want to thank you all, I said, looking slowly around the table, meeting each of their eyes. For everything. For your concern for my well-being. For your advice. For encouraging me to take this much-needed vacation, my mother preened, a self-satisfied smile on her face. Of course, dear. We just want what's best for you. I know you do, I said. And it's that concern that got me thinking about the future. About the cafe, I saw Mark and Leo exchange a quick, excited glance. They thought this was it. The moment I would announce I was stepping back, giving them full control. The cafe is a lot of work, I continued, echoing the words I had used with Mark. And I've been feeling the pressure. So, I've made a big decision. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. I've decided to restructure the business, Mark's smile widened. Restructure how? He asked, leaning forward eagerly. Well, I said, pulling a folder from the handbag I had placed by my chair. It was a copy of the original partnership agreement. I was reviewing our initial contract, and I found something very interesting. I opened it to Section 12, subsection B. It says here, I read aloud, my voice ringing with authority, that any attempt to sell or transfer assets without the explicit, notarized consent of the primary investor in a formal meeting with legal counsel present constitutes a fraudulent breach of contract. The smiles around the table began to falter. Mark's face went pale. Leo shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What are you talking about, Clara? My mother asked, her voice sharp. What does that have to do with anything? It has everything to do with it, I said, my voice turning to ice. Because in the event of such a breach, all shares held by the secondary partner are immediately forfeited. The primary investor assumes 100% ownership. I looked directly at Mark. His face was a mask of disbelief and horror. What are you saying? He stammered. I'm saying, I said, my voice dropping, that you breached the contract, Mark. You breached it when you entered into a secret sales agreement with David Chen to sell my cafe. The color drained completely from his face. Leo looked like he was going to be sick. My mother stared at me, her mouth hanging open. You breached it when you forged my signature on preliminary documents, I continued, my voice rising with every word. And you breached it when you conspired with my stepbrother, Leo, to siphon over $50,000 from the business accounts into his personal shell company, Lionsgate Enterprises. I let the accusation hang in the air. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my stepfather's sharp intake of breath. He was looking at Leo, a murderous expression on his face. He had been funding this, but he clearly did not know the extent of their side dealings. Mark finally found his voice. That's a lie, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. That's a ridiculous, insane lie. You're just stressed out and paranoid. Am I? I asked calmly. I reached into my bag again and pulled out another document. It was the forensic accountant's report. I tossed it onto the center of the table. Here is a detailed report of every fake invoice, every padded expense, and every single transfer to Leo's company. It's all there. The dates, the amounts. Everything. Leo stared at the report as if it were a venomous snake. He could not speak. He just shook his head, looking desperately at his father. My mother finally snapped out of her shock. Clara, this is outrageous, she shrieked, standing up. How dare you come into my house and make these wild accusations against your husband and your brother? "He is not my brother," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "And that man," I said, pointing a trembling finger at Mark, "is not my husband. Not anymore." I then turned my attention to my stepfather. "And you? You were the anonymous investor, weren't you? Funding David Chen's purchase. Using your money to help them steal my inheritance." My stepfather looked away, his face grim. He did not deny it. He knew he was caught. The final piece of my presentation was ready. I took out my phone. "And just in case there's any doubt about the conspiracy to sell the cafe," I said, "I have a recording." I pressed play. It was the conversation I had had with David Chen a few days prior. I had called him, pretending to be confused about some paperwork Mark had given me. I played innocent, and he, thinking he was talking to a fool, had admitted everything. His voice filled the silent room, confirming the deal, confirming Mark's lies about my mental state, confirming the price. When the recording finished, I looked back at Mark. His face was a mess of sweat and panic. He was cornered. He was trapped. But you signed the transfer form," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Last night. I have your signature." A cold smile touched my lips. "Oh, I signed a form, all right," I said. I pulled out the final document from my bag. It was the original confession he had given me, the one he thought was the asset transfer. "But you were in such a hurry, you didn't read the fine print." I handed it to him. He snatched it, his hands shaking as he read. I watched as his eyes scanned the page, as the realization of what he had done dawned on him. I saw the moment his soul seemed to collapse. It was a full confession, admitting to the fraud, the embezzlement, the entire conspiracy. And his signature was right there at the bottom, as a witness to my signature. He dropped the paper, as if it had burned him. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and fear. "You," he breathed. "You planned this. You gave me 3 weeks," I said simply. "I used them." My mother started to sob, a theatrical, self-pitying sound. "How could you do this to your family?" she wailed. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I looked at her, at the woman who had helped orchestrate my ruin, and I felt nothing but a cold, empty pity. "You stopped being my family when you decided my inheritance was more important than my happiness," I said. "You chose your side. Now you get to live with it." I turned to Mark. "I want you out of my house. Tonight. Pack a bag and go. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce and the annulment of our business partnership. As of now, I am the sole owner of the cafe." Then I looked at Leo, who was staring at the floor, pale and trembling. "You're fired, obviously. And I expect the $50,000 to be returned. With interest. Or this accountant's report goes directly to the police." My stepfather stood up abruptly. He looked at his son with utter contempt. "Oh, you'll pay it back," he snarled. "Every last cent. Even if I have to sell your car and everything you own to do it." The party was over. The perfect plan was in ruins. Their perfect future had vanished. I looked at the wreckage of their faces, the shock, the shame, the fury. I felt no triumph, no joy. Just a quiet, clean sense of finality. I had won. I picked up my handbag. "Well," I said to the silent, horrified room, "enjoy your cake." And with that, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving them to choke on the bitter taste of their own deceit. I did not look back. I drove not to the airport, but to a hotel I had booked for the night. I needed space. I needed to breathe air that was not poisoned by their lies. The next morning, I went to the cafe. It was early before it opened. I used my key to let myself in. The space was quiet, filled with the familiar smell of coffee and baked goods. My space. It was truly mine now. I went into the office and found the locked filing cabinet. The key was on Mark's keychain, which he had left on the kitchen counter in his haste to leave. I had brought it with me. I unlocked the cabinet. Inside was a single, thick folder. Project Nightingale. It was their entire plan, all the originals. The sales agreement, the forged documents, the plans for their new restaurant. I took the folder and put it in my bag. Then I sat down at the desk and began to work. I changed all the passwords. I removed Mark and Leo from the payroll system. I called our bank and, with a copy of the partnership agreement and the signed confession faxed over by Mr. Harris, I had Mark removed from the business accounts. The bank manager was horrified by the story and promised his full cooperation.
My phone rang.
It was Mark. I let it go to voicemail. He called again.
And again.
He left a string of desperate, rambling messages. First, he was apologetic, begging for a second chance, claiming Leo had manipulated him. Then, he was angry, threatening to sue me, to ruin me, to tell everyone I was crazy. The threats were empty, and we both knew it. I had all the evidence. He had nothing. I deleted the messages without listening to them all the way through. Later that day, my mother called. I answered. Her voice was strained, exhausted. "Clara, we need to talk," she said. "There's nothing to talk about, Mom." I replied, my voice flat. "You need to fix this," she insisted. "You're tearing this family apart. Leo is a mess. Your stepfather is furious with him. You've ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything," I said calmly. "I just exposed what was already broken. You all did this to yourselves. You made your choices. He is my son," she cried, her voice cracking. "And I am your daughter," I shot back. "Did that ever occur to you while you were helping them plan how to steal from me?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I just wanted everyone to be happy," she finally whispered. "By making me miserable?" I asked. "That's not happiness, Mom. That's just selfishness." Goodbye. I hung up the phone and blocked her number. I blocked Leo's. I blocked my stepfather's. I was cutting the rot out of my life, one clean slice at a time. The weeks that followed were difficult but also liberating. The divorce was swift and brutal for Mark. With the signed confession and the mountain of evidence, he had no leverage. He walked away with nothing but his personal belongings and a mountain of debt. He had to move back in with his parents. I heard through a mutual friend that he was a broken man, bitter and angry at the world.
Good.
Leo, under pressure from his father, paid back the money he had stolen. The funds appeared in my account in a single wire transfer, without a note or an apology. I never saw him again. My relationship with my mother was severed. She sent letters, long, rambling apologies mixed with accusations. I read the first one, then threw the rest away unopened. Some betrayals are too deep to be healed. I focused on the cafe. I hired a new manager, a bright and ambitious young woman named Maria. Together, we revamped the menu, rebranded the space, and poured our energy into making it better than ever. I renamed it the Phoenix because it had risen from the ashes of my old life. The business thrived. Customers loved the new energy, the new food. It became more successful than it ever had been under Mark's management. It turned out he had not been a very good manager, just a very good thief. One person who was a constant source of support was Sarah, my best friend. I had called her the day after the dinner party and told her everything. She listened in horrified silence, then immediately came over with a bottle of wine and a shoulder to cry on. "I cannot believe he did that," she said, her eyes wide with anger on my behalf. "And your mother?" "Clara, I am so sorry. Don't be sorry," I told her, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm not. I'm free. What are you going to do now?" she asked. "I'm going to run my business," I said with a smile. "And I'm going to be happy," and I was. The cloud of deceit and manipulation that had been hanging over me for months was gone. I could breathe again. I felt lighter. I discovered I was stronger than I had ever thought possible. I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable from the people I loved most, and I had not only survived, but I had triumphed. I had taken their perfect plan and turned it into my perfect revenge. About 6 months later, I was working at the cafe one afternoon when I saw them. My mother and Mark. They were walking on the other side of the street. They did not see me. Mark looked terrible. He had lost weight, his shoulders were slumped, and he looked years older. My mother was holding his arm, talking to him with a look of pained sympathy on her face. They looked like two survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to each other for support. A part of me, a small, forgotten part, felt a flicker of pity. But it was quickly extinguished by the memory of their voices on that phone call, their laughter as they planned my ruin. They had made their choices. They had gambled everything on my weakness, on my trust. And they had lost. I turned away from the window and went back to work. I had invoices to check and a new coffee blend to taste. I had a business to run. My business. They wanted to take everything from me, to leave me with nothing. But in the end, they were the ones who had lost it all. They had lost their money, their reputations, and their family. And me? I had lost a husband I never really knew and a family that never really loved me. But I had gained something far more valuable. I had gained myself. They taught me that trust is a fragile thing, easily broken. But they also taught me that I had a core of steel they could never touch. They had tried to burn my world to the ground, but they had only succeeded in lighting a fire within me. And from those ashes, I had risen, stronger, wiser, and finally, truly free. The last I heard, Mark was working a dead-end job in another city, trying to pay off the legal fees and the personal debts he'd accrued. He was a shadow of the confident, charming man I had married. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a permanent air of defeat. Leo was even worse off. His father had cut him off completely, disgusted by the theft and the sheer stupidity of the scheme. He had lost his job, his car, and his place in the family. He was forced to move into a tiny apartment and work 2 low-wage jobs to make ends meet. The life of ease he had felt so entitled to had vanished overnight. My mother remained with my stepfather, but their relationship was reportedly strained to the breaking point. He could never look at her the same way again, knowing she had raised a son like Leo and had actively participated in a plot against her own daughter. Their house, once a symbol of their perfect blended family, became a cold and silent prison of their own making. Sometimes I wondered if they ever thought about me. If they ever felt a moment of genuine remorse for what they had done. I doubted it. People like them did not feel remorse for their actions, only for the consequences. They were not sorry for the betrayal, only that they had been caught. I, on the other hand, was building a new life. The Phoenix was more than just a cafe. It became a community hub. We hosted open mic nights, featured local artists on the walls, and became a beloved neighborhood institution. I made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and found joy in the simple act of building something good and honest. I even started dating again, cautiously at first, but then with a growing sense of hope. I met a man, an architect named Ben, who was kind and funny and, most importantly, honest to a fault. He loved the cafe, and he loved the story of its name. He said it showed a strength he admired more than anything. My father's lawyer, Mr. Harris, became a regular customer. He would come in every Friday for coffee and a pastry, and we would chat. He never spoke of the case, but there was a proud, paternal look in his eyes whenever he looked at me, a silent acknowledgement of the woman I had become. He was a link to my father, a reminder that my father's legacy was not just the money he had left me, but the strength he had instilled in me. One day, about a year after the confrontation, a letter arrived at the cafe. It was from my mother. It was not in a standard envelope, but a thick, cardstock one. A wedding invitation. Leo was getting married. I stared at it, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. The idea that he had found someone to marry him, that he was attempting to build a normal life after what he had done, was absurd. The invitation was a clear olive branch, a desperate attempt by my mother to stitch the family back together for a public event. She wanted to present a united front, to pretend that the gaping wound at the heart of our family had healed. I thought about going. I imagined walking into that reception, a ghost at their feast, my presence a silent rebuke to their charade of happiness. I imagined the looks on their faces, the panicked whispers, the way the air would crackle with tension. The thought was tempting. It was a final twist of the knife, a last act of revenge. But then I looked around my bustling cafe, at the smiling faces of my customers, at the warm, happy life I had built for myself. And I realized I did not need it. My revenge was not a single, dramatic moment. It was my entire life. It was my success, my happiness, my peace. That was something they could never touch, and a punishment they would have to witness from afar for the rest of their lives. I took the invitation and, without opening it, I dropped it into the shredder behind the counter. I watched as it was sliced into 1,000 tiny, meaningless pieces. I was done with them. I was done with their drama, their toxicity, their ghosts. My vacation had been canceled, but I had taken a much longer, more important journey. I had traveled from heartbreak to healing, from victim to victor. And I had finally, truly arrived home. They had wanted my inheritance, my father's legacy. But in the end, all they got was the lesson. A lesson in underestimating the woman they thought they knew. They learned what it feels like to be small, to be powerless, to have everything you've schemed for turned to dust in your hands. And I learned that the best revenge isn't loud and fiery. It's quiet and constant. It's the simple, unassailable fact of a life well lived. And that was a victory worth more than any amount of money.